Today I'm going to be talking about my Planeswalker Crackling Doom deck. It's a 4-color deck: red, green, white, and black. And we're going to start off with the lands here. Basic plains, a single basic plains in the deck here. Next is a single mountain and a single swamp. So those are the only basics I'm running. And next we have a play set of Godless Shrines. Comes into play, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, this card will come into play tapped. Makes black or white mana. Pretty good at fixing and casting those multicolors. And next I have a dual copy set of Marsh Flats. Pay 1 life, sack it, search your library for plains or swamp card, and put it onto the battlefield. Then shuffle your library. It's good for fetching out those lands. And then we have a play set of Arid Mezzas for right here. Pay 1 life. Do the same thing, except you search a mountain for search for a mountain or plains card in your library, and then put it onto the battlefield. So 4 of those, and then onto the dual lands. I have a pair of bad lands. Tap, make red or black mana. It's considered a mountain or swamp, so that's bad lands. Next we have a play set of plateaus. Similar to Badlands, you either tap to make red or, in this case, white. It's considered plains or a mountain. And then we have 4 scrublands. Again, similar to the 2, it's just black and white mana this time. It counts as a swamp or plains. So that is the land base of the deck. It started out originally as a red, black, white deck, but I added some multicolored cards in there. Leading off, we're going to start with the play set of Swords and Plowshares. 1 white mana. Instant, target creature is removed from the game entirely. Creature's controller gains life points equal to the creature's power. A very powerful, good removal card for a white deck to have, and easy to cast in a multicolor deck too, being the cast costs only 1 white mana. Next up is a sort of a fun card I run in some of my other decks, but I like using it here as well. Since it's a black, white, red, green deck, I'm using Hide and Seek. So the hide part is 1 white, 1 red, instant. Put target artifact or enchantment on the bottom of its owner's library. I like Hide a lot as a control card to deal with indestructible items on the board and to potentially save my own enchantments or artifacts or my partners. The other side of it, Seek, 1 black, 1 white, instant. Search target opponent's library for a card and remove that card from the game. You gain life equal to its converted mana cost. Then that player shovels his or her library. The nice thing about Seek is that you can get any card that could be a problem in the opponent's deck out, and you get intel on what they are playing against you. And as a bonus, you get life based on its converted mana cost of the card you get rid of. So if I'm playing a guy and he's doing Eldrazi and he's got Emrakul, well, that's a way to get rid of it and gain a crap ton of life in the process. So Seek can be a very powerful card when it's used against certain decks. I have it in here as a bonus effect to the Hide. Otherwise I'd be running Disenchant or Cindering Growth. So that's Hide and Seek. It's a fun little card. It can even end certain combo decks if they only have a 1-of in their deck. Next up is the namesake of the deck, Crackling Doom. Now my friend ran this, and he showed it to me, and he ran it against me, and I liked it a lot in his black, red, and white deck. So I put it in mine. What it does is it's 1 black, 1 white, 1 red to cast. It's an instant, and it deals 2 damage to each opponent. Each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures he or she controls. So this gets around hexproof. It gets around indestructibility. It gets around pretty much regeneration. So that's why I like running it. And it deals damage. So the damage does stack up. And in this deck, I am running Deathrite Shamon. So you can imagine the deals 2 damage, and then I use Deathrite to remove from my graveyard each opponent loses 2 life. So that right there for 4 mana, I can literally do a crap ton of damage, get rid of the creature board, the strongest creature, and keep everything nice and clean. So that is Crackling Doom. It's a fun card to use in this deck, and it does work very effectively for my play group. Next up, this deck wouldn't be complete without having a playset of Vindicate, everybody's favorite destroy target wallet card. 1 black, 1 white, 1 colorless, sorcery, destroy target permanent. Running this in black and white deck just seems logical instead of doing Oblivion Reign, unless you're not interested in targeting lands and you need to remove something instead of destroy. That would be more efficient. But for this deck, it's based on single target destruction and just single target removal in general, with the exception of Crackling Doom. So that is Vindicate. Very powerful card, and I like the older style art too. It's very, very fitting. Getting into the creatures of the deck now. Like I mentioned before, I have a play set of Deathrite Shamon. It's 1 green or black of Shamon, 1/2. Now the important part of what it does is you tap this card and you can exile a target land card from a graveyard. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Pay 1 black, tap this card, exile a target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard. Each opponent loses 2 life. Or third ability, 1 green, tap this card, exile a target creature card from a graveyard. You gain 2 life. Now, when I vindicate your land and I use this to access your land, it kind of synergizes very well with the deck. I used to run in this deck 4 sinkholes, but then it started becoming not really fun overall to do that to people, so I stopped that. Although some of the cards in here are questionably still, Deathrite Shamon being one of them, but not to the degree of sinkhole. However, Deathrite Shamon helps me generate mana early on and make use out of my sorceries once I'm done using them and instances. So that is Deathrite Shamon, one of the best 1-drop cards ever. Next up, I have a pair of, or rather a playset of Necrotic Slivers. 1 black, 1 white, 1 of any color. It's a 2/2 creature sliver. All slivers have pay 3, sacrifice this creature, destroy target permanent. So essentially it's a Vindicate on a stick that you have to pay another 3 for. It's not as efficient because you have to wait another turn. However, you can, with this card, you can kind of buy time on the board and make people think about playing and slow them down playing that card, which is essential for this deck. And I would still want to keep in touch with the red or black-white theme of permanent destruction. So it goes very well and fitting with Vindicate. So that is Necrotic Sliver for you. Next up is a flex slot of 4 cards. I have a playset of Angel of Despair, coming at 2 black, 2 white, and 3 of any color. I use this card in my multicolor Angel deck, and I'm using it in this deck too. It's a flying 5/5 Angel. When it comes into play, you destroy a target permanent. So you can kind of see a theme going on with the deck where most of the cards I have can deal with permanents on the board in one way or another. And I believe the density of cards in this deck that can deal with creatures is somewhere up above 26, I think. So I have 26 different cards that can potentially destroy a creature, or remove it, or sack it. So I have a playset of these. It's a high casting cost for the deck, so I do have some trouble reaching out and getting to this late game, but once I do, I can kind of take over the late game board again. So that is Angel of Despair. Really nice card for the deck and theme. Next card I have here is a legendary enchantment. It's Oath of Liliana. And being that this is a Planeswalker deck, I figured it'd be appropriate to use this this enchantment card. What it says is it's 1 black, 2 of any color. When Oath of Liliana enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature. At the beginning of each end step, if a planeswalker entered the battlefield under your control this turn, put a 2/2 zombie creature token onto the battlefield. I have this card in here because of the top ability, really. It says when it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature. And I tried to maximize the what I like to call area of effect, or AoE. It's a wild term that I carry over to this game. Basically, this affects an area, not just one player, but multiple players. And more importantly, it does not affect me, but only my opponents. So I try to keep it as a one-sided thing in the deck. That's why I'm using this card, similar to like Crackling Doom, for example, or Deathrite Shamon. If I can maximize effects like that in this deck, I can really bring this to the two-headed giant table and run control to a certain degree. That being said, is this the best two-headed giant strategy or synergy? No, there's plenty of better decks than this out there. But this is a deck that I enjoy and have fun with quite a lot, and it's a thematic deck, and that to me is more worth it than necessarily being competitive. I have competitive decks for other reasons. This is not a competitive deck. So that's why this card's in the deck, and it's taking advantage of the planeswalkers I'm running. And we're going to get to that right now. So, the first one up is a flex slot. I plan on replacing this guy, but I have him for now. It's Nikolas, I think. That's how you pronounce his name. Nikolas, Reignited. 2 black, 3 of any color. Planeswalker. Comes into play with 5 loyalty counters. Put 1 loyalty counter on him. You draw a card, and you lose 1 life. Take 3 loyalty counters off him. Destroy target creature. Take 8 loyalty counters off him. Target opponent gets an emblem with whenever a player draws a card, you lose 2 life. So I'm usually using this guy in the deck to draw and destroy creatures. His last ability I'm not that interested in. It has 1 games, and it sticks around. I like that. But in the 5-mana slot, I didn't have any options at the time to pit another planeswalker for that mana cost slot. And being a black planeswalker, I can cast him in this deck. So I do like his functionality of destroying target creature. That is something that does come to use. Next card is Liliana Vess, coming in at 5 mana also. 2 black, 3 of any color. It comes into play with 5 loyalty counters. Add 1 loyalty counter. Target player discards a card. Minus 2 loyalty counters. Search your library for a card, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. Minus 8 loyalty counters. Put all creature cards in all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. I use her mainly to control the hand, and then to tutor answers to what's on the battlefield. I rarely get to the 8 ability, which is fine. This deck doesn't really care about necessarily keeping its planeswalkers alive for more than 2 turns. It's usually a distraction so that my health doesn't go down too fast. So it's a buffer in some ways, and if it manages to stick around, that's good. And it also works on the theory that if I flood the battlefield with more than 1 planeswalker, it becomes that much harder to keep up with killing them. So that's why I run a high density of planeswalkers in this deck. The next planeswalker is Sauron, Lord of Innistrad. 1 black, 1 white, and 2 of any color. He's almost up there with my favorite planeswalker in that if you look at his abilities, it says +1 to loyalty. He does put a black and white, or rather, put a 1/1 black vampire creature token lifelink onto the battlefield. So he protects himself with his first ability. Subtract 2 loyalty counters. You get an emblem that says creatures you control get 1 + 0. So that's okay for an aggro deck. His -6 ability is interesting, and I've used it before. It says destroy up to 3 target creatures and or other planeswalkers. Return each card put into a graveyard this way onto the battlefield under your control. And so again, he's functioning like board control, much like some of my other planeswalkers in this deck. I like that, and he hits threats on the table, and he's able to defend himself. And that's why I like this card quite a lot. So that's Sauron Lord of Innistrad. Next up is a sort of a wonky card in the deck. I would like to get a better version of Gideon at 4 mana. I know there's other updated versions of him in that 4 mana converted mana cost slot, but this is the only one I had access to. This is Gideon, Champion of Justice, 2 white and 2 of any color. Comes into play with 4 loyalty counters. His +1 ability is put a loyalty counter on Gideon, Champion of Justice for each creature target opponent controls. His 0 ability is this: until end turn, he becomes a indestructible human soldier creature with power and toughness, each equal to the number of loyalty counters on him. He's still a planeswalker. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to him this turn. So if I don't have any creatures to put pressure on people, I'll just swing with them. His last ability is -15 low counters, and says exile all other permanents. I don't like that ability necessarily. Have I used it? No. Is it that important that I use it? Not in this deck, not really. So I'm not really using him for his 3rd ability or necessarily his 0 ability. It's mainly, he's in there mainly to draw the hate off the other planeswalkers. And the next one I'm going over is my favorite one, which is Elspeth, Knight Errant. She's 2 white, 2 of any color, and she comes into play with 4 loyalty counters. Her +1 ability is put a 1/1 white soldier token onto the battlefield. Her other ability, the second one, is also a plus ability, which is nice. It says target creature gets 3/3 and gains flying until end of turn. That is an extremely powerful ability, and she's one of the few planeswalkers that has no real negative abilities in terms of removing loyalty counters until her last one. And her last one is remove 8 loyalty counters. You get an emblem with artifacts, creatures, enchantments, and lands you control are indestructible. So that last ability is really important in some of my decks. In this deck, it's not as important. What is important in this deck is her ability to make tokens and clog up the board. And in some setups, I will use the second ability with other sideboard cards in my deck to push damage if I wanted to run this as an aggro deck with less planeswalkers. So does Elspeth, Knight Errant. I would say she's probably my favorite and the best planeswalker I've used in most of my decks. Next card is a Joni Vengeance. He's very good in certain shelves, and this is one of the shelves where I like him in. I used to run Sinkholes in this deck, and I still have 2 other copies in the sideboard of him. So I run him in conjunction with Sinkholes and Vindicates, and it's because of his first ability. So he's 1 white, 1 red, 2 of any color, comes into play with 3 loyalty counters. However, his +1 ability is target permanent does not untap during its control's next untap step. So he acts as a tempo control, or he can defend himself with his plus ability or slow down the opponent, which is nice. His second ability is a -2 loyalty, and he deals 3 damage to target creature or player, and you gain 3 life. So it's a lightning helix basically on a stick. His last ability is -7. Destroy all lands target player controls. So you can see why I would abuse this card in this deck when it was really focused on land destruction. That being said, it's not as focused on that anymore, but I can still do it to a certain degree. I'm mainly using him to slow down creatures from hitting planeswalkers and or gaining life with the last ability. So he still functions as creature removal. So that is a Joni Vengeance. I do like him in this deck, and I think he's one of the better ones. Next one is sort of an okay red card. He's okay. He's Koth of the Hammer, and he takes 2 red, 2 of any color. Comes into play with 3 loyalty counters. First ability, +1 loyalty. Untap target mountain. It becomes a 4/4 red elemental creature until the turn. It's still land. His -2 loyalty counter. Add 1 red mana. Add 1 red to your mana pool for each mountain you control. That can be useful if you want to power out something pretty quick and fast. His last ability is you get an emblem with mountains you control have tap. This land deals 1 damage to target creature or player. That is a nice last ability, and especially if it's at -5 5 loyalty counters, you can get to that pretty quickly, and make the game go really quick if you have enough mountains out. And I usually do have more than 2 by this time when I'm using him. So I use his ability to untap a land and then cast it, retap it for mana. That's generally what I'm using the first ability for. So I get a sort of a buyback usually when I cast him out for 4 mana. I'll get another mana to use for like a lightning bolt, or if I have a plateau, I'll just untap that and I'll have a Swords of Plowshare ready to go. So that is Koth of the Hammer, decent Planeswalker. If I come across a better 4 mana one, I will throw that in that slot. The next one's a really fun card and a more appropriate card for this deck, being that I do use quite a lot of instances and sorceries. It's Chandra the Firebrand, coming in at 1 red and 3 of any color. She's very easy to cast in this deck that has multicolors instead of the 2 mana cost Planeswalkers. She comes into play with 3 loyalty counters. She has a +1 ability, which is Chandra the Firebrand deals 1 damage to target creature or player, so that can act as removal. Her second ability is interesting, and is the one I use the most, is when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So when I used to run the sinkholes and I had her out, it'd be not really nice. It's still not really nice when I do the Vindicate twice with this card. Especially if I have in the sideboard, I also have forks. So I can, in theory, cast Vindicate, and if I have enough mana, which I should at this point, next turn after I put this out, I can cast Vindicate up to 3 times. But that's rare. The second ability that is really nice, acting as a pseudo fork. So that's why I have her in the deck, and she does function as somewhat of a creature removal with her +1 ability and her -6 ability, which is Chandra the Firebrand deals 6 damage to each of up to 6 target creatures and or players. So very good in 2-handed giant. I like her. She fits the deck very nicely. Next up is Sarkon the Dragon Speaker, coming at 2 red and 3 of any color. Comes into play with 4 loyalty counters. His +1 ability is, until end of turn, Sarkon the Dragon Speaker becomes a legendary 4/4 dragon creature with flying, indestructible, and haste. Very powerful when you want to push damage real quick. His -3 ability is he deals 4 damage to target creature. Again, creature control removal. His last ability is -6. You get an emblem at the beginning of your draw step. Draw 2 additional cards, and then at the beginning of your end step, discard your hand. I almost never use that last ability. I'm either using mainly his +1 ability and sometimes his -3 ability. So that is Sarkon Dragon Speaker. He's in the deck to act as a decoy for some of the other better Planeswalkers. The last one is a harder Planeswalker to cast, being that he's 7 mana. However, in a multicolor deck, 7 mana of any color is also not that hard too. It's just getting to the number amount, which can be kind of troubling. Karn Liberated. He comes into play with 6 loyalty counters. His first ability is +4. Target player exiles a card from his or her hand, which is nice. It goes in tangent with Liliana that I have in this deck. But I'm using him for his second ability. It says -3 loyalty counters. Exile target permanent. That's target permanent. And it says exile. So that's very powerful in that you don't have to worry about any graveyard effects going on once you get rid of a permanent on the board. So that is nice to use. And again, he acts as creature removal. His last ability is Restart the Game, leaving in exile all non-or permanent cards exiled with Karn Liberated. Then put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. I don't use his last ability either on this Planeswalker. I don't see it being very functional for this type of deck. Obviously, I'm not running Tron. If I was, I'd have all the fun lands to do all this crazy stuff, but I really have him in here as extra board control. Although I do swap him out sometimes, but due to the legend rule with Planeswalkers, I like to have a 1-of in each deck so I can have multiple 1-ofs on the table so I can clog the board with Planeswalkers. And if I'm not mistaken, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 planeswalkers in the deck out of 60 cards. So that's 1/6 of a chance to draw my planeswalkers and promote the theme of the deck, Crackling Doom and planeswalkers essentially. So that is the main deck. Now the sideboard is a work in progress. It's been changed up many times, and there's different ideas going on with it. So I'll start off with Oath of Chandra, 1 red and 1 of any color. Legendary Enchantment. When Oath of Chandra enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to target creature and opponent controls. So it functions as creature removal again. At the beginning of each end step, if a planeswalker entered the battlefield under your control this turn, Oath of Chandra deals 2 damage to each opponent. Again, going with the idea that I want to hurt more than one guy per effect, this is a good choice to go along in tangent with the Deathrite Shamons, the Crackling Dooms, Liliana's Oath. I want to have stuff that affects multiple players. I think I get more value for that in team setting, and this deck was designed to be in somewhat of a two-headed giant team situation. So that is Oath of Chandra. Next up is a pair of Joni Vengeance. Much like the guy in the main deck, same idea, just more consistency. So that's why I have them in there. And next up is an interesting contrast to what the deck is about. Sometimes I will try to play the deck as an aggro deck, and I will put in a play set of lightning bolts. So 1 red does 3 damage to 1 target, instant cast. Classic red spell. If you run aggro, it's most likely going to be in your deck, unless you're doing Legacy Goblins, then maybe you're doing something else like Tarfire. But great spell. Not much else needs to be said about it. It's an iconic Magic card. So that is Lightning Bolt. Next up is a pair of Forks. This card is like Reverberate, but it's the original version of it. Essentially, it's 2 red mana, and it says interrupt. That's old terminology. It's an instant. Any sorcery or instant spell just cast is doubled. Treat Fork as an exact copy of target spell, except that Fork remains red. Copy and original may have different targets. Okay, so like I was saying earlier, I was running sinkholes in the deck, and sometimes I would copy a sinkhole, and if I had Chandra out, I would copy the Fork, and the Fork's original spell would target. I would get 3 spells essentially for the price of 2, which is not bad. I find it's very useful when fighting spell decks too. Sometimes they have a counter spell, and I have to counter their counter spell. There you go. I mean, there's a whole variety of uses for this card. So I run with 2 of them in here, and I find it quite fun to use. Next up is a plan of aggro attack for a first turn drop. Figure of Destinies. I like this card. It's one of my favorite white/red cards for aggro decks. It's 1 red or white. It's a 1/1. Pay 1 red or white. Figure of Destiny becomes a 2/2 Kithkin Spirit. Pay 3 red or white. If Figure of Destiny is a spirit, it becomes a 4/4 Kithkin Spirit Warrior. Pay 6 red or white. If Figure of Destiny is a warrior, it becomes an 8/8 Kithkin Spirit Warrior Avatar with flying and has first strike. So this is a great early game, great mid game, great late game top deck card to have, and it can bring you back from the brink at 1 mana cost. So it's highly efficient in this deck. Why is it not in the main board? I've been playing around with different versions. Sometimes I will take out a little bit more planeswalkers or take out some hide and seeks. Depends on what I want to do with the deck. I like being able to change the playstyle of the deck, not necessarily due to what I'm fighting, but more just for having fun, and that's why it's in the sideboard. Are there better options for the deck? Yes. Are there more efficient options? Probably. This is the most fun I can think of, and I wanted to use the card in the deck. So it's it's a red and white card, so it fits in obviously with the colors very well. So that is Figure of Destiny. Very useful, very aggressive card. 1 game's off of that. Next one is sort of just the filler slot. It's my Ollie from Cairo. It's kind of a strange ability to have in red, where it's like a worship, basically. It comes in at 2 red and 2 of any color. He's a 0/1. While he's in play, damage that would reduce you to less than 1 life lowers you to 1 life. All further damage is prevented. Back in the old days, this used to be a really powerful card with, I forget that monolith, I think it's called Jade Monolith, where Jade Monolith was an artifact. I think it was like 1 or 2 mana to cast, and it had an ability, I forget how much it cost to use, but you basically pay the ability cost, and it says that all damage that would be dealt to creatures is redirected to you. So you would keep this guy alive from burning and getting killed off by a bunch of old cards back in the old days. And there wasn't, outside of Swords of Plowshare and Fireballs, Lightning Bolts, Unsummon, and a few other cards, there wasn't that much of a common occurrence of removal. So he was a really annoying card to have in play. And he's always been expensive, from what I remember. So, I like the art. It's got a funny flavor to it. And I just kind of threw him in this deck because I didn't have anything better to use with the deck. So that's Ali from Cairo. Next up is, last but not least, is Nevin Morale's Disc. This is a common theme in most of my casual decks, is using Nevin Morale's Disc. 4 mana, artifact, comes into play tapped. Pay 1, tap this card, destroy all creatures, enchantments, and artifacts in play, including this disc itself. Now, if I use Elspeth Ultimate in this deck, and I have this card out, I can wipe the board repeatedly. So that's a built-in little fun thing I like to do sometimes, and I don't have too many answers in this deck for shrouded artifacts, shrouded enchantments, that sort of thing. So I need a sort of a catch-all board sweeper, and this kind of fills the slot nicely. I could run Wrath of Gods in the deck, but I find that I'm not having too much trouble with the amount of single target removal I've been running in the deck. So it's not been nearly as an issue, but it can be, and that's why this card's in the deck. So that is Nevin Morale's Disc, or Nevin Morale's Disc. And the nice thing about it is that it doesn't destroy your planeswalkers. So you can get a one-sided effect, essentially. And that is my Crackling Doom Planeswalker deck. Thanks for watching. I'm John with the Fossil Channel.